Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us on our 35th episode at the Blowback Roundtable. The full name of our podcast is Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. And so that's what we kind of like to do. And we are very fortunate today to have three excellent guests. They are all contributors to the Avant-Garde Journal. And the Avant-Guard Journal is associated with the free school, the Saturday Free School. We did have Dr. Anthony Montero, on a few weeks ago. He talked a little bit about the Saturday Free School. And these are some great, I'm going to call you young people. I don't know if that's appropriate, but kind of makes me feel old to call you young people. But you guys think young people qualifies. But so this journal, I've read each of your contributions and I found it provocative and great. Like I actually agreed with, your points of view. Before we get into the nitty gritty of, your specific articles, what can we say? What can we say that I didn't say about the Avant-Garde Journal? Does anybody want to jump in and just talk a little bit about it?
I can say a few things. So yeah, thanks to three of you for having us on. Jahan and Serafina and I are all members of the Saturday Free School, like you mentioned, and we're also contributors as well as editors, along with actually Doc Tony Montero and another member of the Free School, Michelle Liu. We're kind of the unofficial, official editorial team for Avant-Garde as a whole. And so we actually just launched the journal a few weeks ago during the Henry Winston Symposium that the Free School held in Philadelphia, which a few members of, I think, your audience were able to attend, including Todd. And thank you, Todd, also for connecting us with the Blowback.
For sure. Thanks, Todd.
Feel free to plug the URL. We'll put it down in the description box. But
it's avantjournal.com. So pretty short.
It's also currently in the description on the, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's there in the description. So you guys can click on it. And yes, definitely Todd has been very helpful in connecting us. So we appreciate that. What was the impetus behind a journal?
Yeah, so I don't know, Jahan, do you want to take it, or I can also go?
Jahan, I'm going to leave that open for you. I'm just going to say, but it has an official slogan. It is a journal of peace, democracy, science, and issue 1 is dedicated to Henry Winston, which is an interesting primer. Maybe take it from there.
Right. Yeah, I think so. Basically, avant-garde is something that emerges from the ideas of the Free School, and we've been, as Doc said, and when you guys interviewed him, the Free School has been meeting for over a decade, and it's kind of over the years developed into kind of this. We almost think of it as like a body of thought, a way of thinking, and kind of a constellation of different ideas, but also of art, and also rooted in Philadelphia, where most of us are based. And so we felt that, first of all, that there is a need in American society right now for ideas and for a place where people can actually think for themselves and engage in what we see as the struggle of ideas. So I think that was a lot of the impetus for it, and especially the name of Avant-Garde, and as Ben said, a journal of peace, democracy, and science. Part of it is we wanted to kind of reclaim this idea and this concept and the term of the avant-garde away from how it is, I think, especially for younger people, I feel like I associated avant-garde with basically like postmodern art, and art that doesn't actually speak to anything, but is basically there to make you, to kind of almost ridicule ordinary people. And so we wanted to kind of reclaim the tradition of the avant-garde from not just the French origin, but also from how it had been associated with kind of the freedom movement in the United States, with the Black freedom movement. And artists like John Coltrane, who we were talking about before the show, Archie Shepp, all of these artists who were connected with the freedom movement in the United States. And to basically make the point that we don't see this concept of the avant-garde as being separate from the people, but actually as part of the forward movement of the American people in this time. And so, yeah, that was kind of the impetus for it. And then, and yeah, as Ben was saying, the first issue is dedicated to Henry Winston, who we see as a revolutionary scientist who has to be kind of reclaimed for this time, which we talked about at the symposium. And so a lot of what we're working out is these questions of what will be a revolutionary science for this time, like new ways of thinking, new ways also of relating, of creating art also. And so yeah, we kind of see the three pillars of peace, democracy, and science as also kind of demands of this moment in which the American people are crying out for peace, are crying out for democracy, but are also crying out for knowledge and seeking new knowledge, and new ways of understanding the world in order to change it. And so, yeah, we really want the publication to be of service of that and to be part of the forward movement of the American people, and opposed to that. So, yeah, that was kind of long and winding, but
no, that was great. I really appreciate that. The first thought that came to my mind was that Carlo's going to be the first to tell you that with the American people, you have a big challenge before you.
I was going to say an uphill battle, but yeah, Billy Bob grabbed that one.
I would add something to that when you're talking about jazz, because when bebop came about, and Charlie Parker, Charlie Christian, Bud Powell, the whole array, Max Roach, one of the things that occurred was that white musicians were stealing the popularity of bebop by going to performances and then mimicking them as well as they could. So Charlie Christian himself, I think, it's not apocryphal. I think it's apocryphal, but the way I understand it, Charlie Christian suggested that they make bebop so difficult that the white players couldn't play it. And that lends to a kind of elitism beyond the normal elitism. It wasn't the general population that was into swing at the time and big bands was being ignored by the bebop movement, and it became a kind of elitist performance. And when you think of jazz, how do you reconcile Thelonious Monk, Cecil Taylor, Ornette Coleman, even Archie Shepp? Well, Archie Shepp, I had a wonderful evening with Archie Shepp. So we went to hear him at the One Step Down here in D.C. And his band came to our table and sat down during the breaks for the whole evening. But anyway, and there was a revolutionary fervor in what he did, but a lot of jazz, it's revolutionary in an artistic sense, but not in a political sense. And I had Tony Montero and I, we just had a very excited or vibrant discussion over jazz when he was on the show. And but in my mind, I can't reconcile the notion of direct revolution and appealing to people, to a great number of people, because in my experience, in my lifetime, avant-garde jazz, as well as 20th century classical music like Edgar Varese and George Antil and all these people, it doesn't appeal to George Crumb. It doesn't appeal to wide audiences, and that's certainly, I think, the case with jazz from bebop on. It ceased to be a popular art form to the degree that many other musical forms had larger audiences. So, does that make any sense? I mean,
who wants to take that one? Serafina, you look like you're talking, but you're muted.
The name. Oh, the name. Oh, I wanted to say that the name Avant-Garde. We recently had our event on Henry Winston, um, and in our event, that same question of the title Avant-Garde was kind of brought up. Jeremiah also explained as well, our interest is being a part of the forward momentum of people. So from the ground up, does ideas, philosophy, science, art, culture spring? From the ground up, do the revolutionary traditions of Martin Luther King spring? And that's also what moves forward people and the life world of people. So I think that the avant-garde title has more to do with that impetus than the experience solely that you're explaining, Carla, of the music itself. Because I think that the music had to do also with that revolutionary forward movement, if you see what I'm saying, and is an expression of what the consciousness of the people were also capable of. But I think avant-garde is a philosophical and political statement that in this time there is still a will of the people that is moving forward, and it's welcoming peace, humanity, that kind of thing.
No, I agree. It's there definitely, and in a direct form, Coltrane wrote a marvelous piece about when the four young girls were killed in the bombing at Birmingham. I mean, it's just it's out there. There is this direct expression. I do agree with that. I the it's just that I know that the appeal of the music itself is fairly narrow compared to a lot of things. I mean, you have Motown, you have Curtis Mayfield, people like that. They have and had much wider audiences. So I just yeah. But the avant-garde, when I think of avant-garde, I think of uh, that element musically in jazz, especially beginning with bebop. So.
And I was making a kind of flippant remark. I was just, alluding to the challenge, right? The challenge that we have, ourselves as revolutionaries, as people that want to, create a better system. It's a challenge because, we need to unite, the working class. We need to make a formidable, political party, a political force that is capable of, challenging the status quo, the entrenched establishment. And I know Carlo is quick to say how difficult that's going to be given our population. And so I had a flippant remark, that kind of got us off on that trajectory. But I want to get back on course a little bit and just talk about the content of our initial volume 1 of our journal. So I don't know who would like to go first, and if nobody raises their hand, I'm going to choose someone. But I'd like to talk about your specific contribution to issue number 1 of the Avant-Garde Journal. We can go left to right. We haven't heard from Jahan. If that's okay, Jahan, I'd like to hear from you about your your contribution to the first volume.
Yes. So I think a few of our articles are, based on tackling some of the leading theories that are out there in the progressive world or the revolutionary world. And basically in the spirit of Henry Winston, Strategy for a Black Agenda was also a critique of competing ideologies of liberation. And so my particular article is entitled The Counter-Revolution of Gerald Horne, Empiricism, Mechanical Materialism, Cultural Nationalism in Service of the Elites. And essentially, I was inspired to write this article. The reason, I think each of these articles is a collective decision, I should say, for a political purpose. And so we noticed from 2016 onward, Gerald Horne, historian, he's a historian, kind of considered a historian of the Black left, a person who has had a history in the Communist Party, for those who aren't familiar. But in the past few years, since 2016, he's gotten much more popular in the mainstream. For example, there was the 1619 Project launched by the New York Times, and the person who ran that, I think her name was Hannah Nicole Jones, she basically said on Twitter that Gerald Horne is a major inspiration, particularly his book, The Counter-Revolution of 1776, for the 1619 Project. And essentially, 1619 Project was an attempt to try to bring a quote-unquote anti-racist historical perspective through the New York Times to address U.S. society in the aftermath of the rise of Trump. And really, it was a neoliberal, elitist project and an anti-populist project. And so what I wanted to do in my essay is to tackle Gerald Horne and explain how a Gerald Horne is very different from W.E.B. Du Bois, because also he had started to write about, in addition to that book on the counter-revolution of 1776, he had started to write essays on Black Reconstruction, and all of that sort of thing. So, and we noticed a lot of people start to kind of accept him as a thinker of race and class in that sense. And so we thought it was important to clarify all of these things, especially coming out of our own deep study of W.E.B. Du Bois, and to explain how these are very different perspectives.
That's a great framework there. It's debating the ideas of revolution, and then the theory of revolution, and pointing out where the differences are, and saying, hey, these are the differences, and given these differences, which way ought we go? Which theory should we adopt and utilize? So that's super important. Like that's inescapably important for any successful movement. So I appreciate and encourage the work that you guys are doing. So could we break it down for lay people? Like what is Gerald Horne kind of saying that maybe should be said differently? Is that possible? And we don't want to, like, Gerald Horne has actually been on our program with me and Carlo, and I'm not smart enough to get to the minutia about where he disagrees. He seemed like a very, obviously he's a very, very nice, educated man, like you explained. And but I know that there was some criticism about his theory, and so I'm wondering if we could just maybe. And again, without Gerald here, it's we're going to have to be very charitable. But in a nutshell, can you kind of maybe just explain it so lay people can get a gist of what the differences are?
Yeah. So to begin with, as I mentioned, his book, The Counter-Revolution of 1776, is very significant in this discussion. I mean, Horne has written many books. He's a very prolific historian, actually. I tried to calculate. I think he's in the past, since 2010, he's written almost 1 to 2 books a year, which is quite crazy, in terms of just writing. But particularly this book is the one that has been taken up by the New York Times and others. And essentially, the argument that the book makes is that the American Revolution of 1776 was not a revolution. It was actually a counter-revolution. And the reason for that is that he argues the British Empire, London, was preparing to actually abolish slavery. And the American revolutionaries, the founding fathers and what typically are called the patriots, their rebellion against the crown was basically entirely motivated by the desire to preserve slavery. And so this is a totally new thesis, which has not something that any progressive forces have really put forward before. And so when you dig into it, first, you find some basic, I feel, and many people have pointed out, or a few people have pointed out, and Horne has not responded, factual problems. There was a review on World Socialist website and another one on Midwestern Marx that looked at, just in the introduction alone, either the introduction or the first chapter, I think it was the first chapter, the ways in which he had misused and misrepresented evidence from some of these anti-British forces, newspapers, and so on, who are responding to a case in Britain called Somerset's case, which had abolished slavery just in England itself. And so there's some basic just historical and factual problems. And the fact that he has not responded to those particular people pointing that out, I think, is a serious problem. But then moving on in a more ideological level, so he is presenting him. I mean, he is claiming to be in the legacy of people like Du Bois. We could call a black Marxist or black communist tradition and methodology. But when you look at the ways in which he does history, he's what we, in terms of philosophy, would identify as taking a empiricist approach, in that he is saying that the point is to just catalog and identify facts. And many of his books, he's definitely has worked hard in archives and so on. I think books which are better than Counter-Revolution of 1776 and cataloging different things and so on. But that itself does not give you a revolutionary understanding, just cataloging history. I mean, when you and what I tried to do in the essay is compare Horne's approach to Du Bois. And Horne critiques, some of the traditional Marxism for not bringing in race, but the way he's essentially retreating into what Winston in Strategy for a Black Agenda called the skin strategy, and in which essentially he is going to a understanding that is rejecting essentially or minimizing class struggle and highlighting what Horne is calling a race struggle. For example, in the preface to Counter-Revolution 1776, he says that his study of the American Revolution and essentially American history as a whole, because he's written a lot on American history, leads him to the understanding that we should abandon the Marxist slogan of "Workers of the World Unite" and adopt "Africans of the World Unite." And this is again something very old. People, even in Winston's time, who would claim the mantle of Du Bois and revolutionary Pan-Africanism, but in substance be following essentially the ideas of Marcus Garvey and others, and promoting basically a form of reactionary cultural nationalism. And the last point I'll say is that Horne, even his a review he wrote of Black Reconstruction in The Nation magazine, as he basically said, yes, Du Bois did a good job cataloging some facts about the South and so on and Reconstruction, but he failed to identify the United States as a quote-unquote prison house of nations, and essentially failed to adopt the settler colonial perspective on U.S. history. And so we have a tremendous clash between Horne taking essentially this settler colonial perspective, which is to say that the white workers are essentially settlers, not a proletariat, and Du Bois's very sophisticated understanding of the black worker and the white worker, which, as I again tried to get into the essay, this is quite a deep concept. The Du Bois is not using these empirically just to say there's a particular person that's a white worker and a particular person that's a black worker, a group of people. These are deep philosophical, sociological concepts, which are not just about the revolutionary history of Reconstruction, but are something that runs throughout American history, something very, very important in our time. And so Horne is emerging. Horne is just emerging, at this time of this populist rebellion, and his theories are giving space to the ruling elite to try to stabilize and to try to, divide the people. Yeah.
My instant thought was it's so contemporary, because much among the United States, they self-called leftists who read the J. Sakai people. They do exactly the same today. Mm-hmm. So that was very interesting.
So, I mean, the point I would make to kind of help explain it, and correct me if this is way off base, but it kind of sounds like, the approach that Horne is taking kind of lends itself to a divisive identity politics. And it's kind of it kind of makes, the unity that's going to be necessary and required more difficult to achieve. Like, is that a fair kind of statement?
Yes, I would agree with both points. Firstly, to what Ben said, Horne doesn't explicitly cite Sakai, but I reviewed Sakai, and I also saw deep parallels with the arguments that Horne is making. And secondly, to Billy Bob's points, yes, absolutely. I think that it is essentially. You could definitely compare it to identity politics, but also the problem is that Horne is saying that the choice is either what he's advocating, this kind of neocultural nationalism, which is friendly to the elites, because he's written also in another essay that the 1619 Project shows that the New York Times and many sections of the U.S. elite are more progressive on race than the left. because they are saying that U.S. history to begin with is, the American project is fundamentally about preserving slavery, and that there is no democratic or revolutionary essence in the history of the United States. And so that's essentially what he's putting forward. And he's trying to say that it's either that, Horn's perspective, or a very race-less white Marxism, which does not at all grapple with the problem of race and the color line. And throughout that whole thing, he's obscuring the tradition that we are trying to base ourselves in, the Du Boisian tradition, the Henry Winston tradition, and ultimately Martin Luther King tradition, which does see the centrality of race and the color line, but sees the ways in which there can be a unity, there can be a united working class, and a new United States, a new American people emerging from that. And these are very important dialectical processes that I think Horn is totally obscuring with his arguments. Although again, they're gaining a lot of traction in our milieu because of the political situation.
Yeah, I'd only just like to add to what Jahan is saying. I think part of the reason why we even would critique a figure like Horn is not even out of any like personal animus or something. It's more that, especially like something I forgot to mention is a lot of the focus for our journal is not exclusively, but we really want to speak to younger people, to the young generation. And we want this to be something that, like I'm speaking about Avant-Garde as a whole. And I feel like as a young person, especially on social media, like Horn is one of those people who is kind of promoted as like, oh, this is who you should turn to if you're interested in revolutionary politics, if you're interested in the history of, like Black leftism or of communism, like all that stuff. And I think when you actually listen to Horn, like, I feel like for me, it was actually almost like shocking some of the things that he would say on like all these podcasts or on the articles that Jahan mentions, where he's like basically jokes about or makes light of the possibility of a third world war and says that it would have, quote unquote, both good and bad consequences. And also, like Jahan was saying, he's basically telling Black people and young people, your ally is the ruling class and not like the working class. Your ally is basically these woke elites, like who are in the New York Times, who are more friendly to his book, The Counter-Revolution of 1776, and not just like ordinary people. And essentially the argument that Horn is saying is that the United States is unworthy and incapable of revolution. And that basically all Black people can hope for is essentially to separate from white people and to also view all white people as just, he uses almost like this term of settler as like a slur against white people. And I think that like that stuff, like, I don't know, just like those, first of all, like what he's saying has to be properly just like addressed. But I think it also has to be denounced for being something that is an attack upon the American people, an attack also which has even greater significance in this time, because one of the things that I really like about what Jahan says in the article is that it's like what Horn is promoting is a belief that the American people in this time cannot commit the highest act of solidarity with the people, with humanity, which would be to actually attack American empire and to overcome imperialism. Because if Gerald Horn is kind of touting himself as like, oh, like I'm an expert on neocolonialism and African anti-colonial movements and all this stuff, then how can you basically say that neocolonialism must end without actually having a belief that the American masses, the American people, can be part of ending a system of imperialism from within? Like, how can you square those things by being, quote unquote, against neocolonialism and against imperialism while still saying that the American people are fundamentally incapable and unworthy of achieving that from inside of the empire? And I feel like all those things have to be said clearly. And I think this is part of the reason why, we felt the need to produce a journal like this, which is we're not like haters. Like, we're not just doing it because like we have a personal animus, but like we're trying to find the truth. And we know that many young people especially, but also, all kinds of people in America right now are searching for new ideas, are fundamentally searching for a way out and searching for the truth. And we want to be part of that. And we feel like things actually have to be said clearly, because that's part of what we think people deserve and what people are already looking for.
Well said, Jeremiah. I'm going to do a quick, Carlo, you can be next, a quick interjection, because it's more sinister than people know, because you've mentioned that this is basically a tool used against the US working classes. But there's another arena, and I don't mean to switch to international politics just yet, but I've heard the phrase from Jahan, which is, what was it, the jail of nation, enslaver of nations, right? I've heard that one. And of course, decolonization for at least a year, but that was last week, all used against Russia. You know, basically the old born on the left concepts being used very sinisterly by the US empire's foreign policy machine. Now just think about that for a second, you know, when you get presented this narrative. So very, very important and interesting.
Well, I just wanted to say that we've come full circle back to what Billy Bob was poking me with, and that is this notion that I feel also that at least a majority of white America, people that, for example, I'll just be blunt about it, people that blindly support Trump. I mean, Biden, obviously, he's a stooge in the of the deep state, and that's the classic form that people that are as old as I am, who remember the Vietnam War and was there when Kennedy was assassinated, we recognize the power of the Central Intelligence Agency. We understand the Dulles brothers, and the power they wielded. So I'm not siding with the Democratic administration or in any form, or the people that boost them or represent them. But Billy Bob he thinks these people are educable, and I don't think they're educable. And here we have Billy Bob, who's an avowed Stalinist and communist. And when Donald Trump speaks, he says the first people he's going to kill are the communists, or he's going to gather up are the communists. And Billy Bob is simply banking on the notion that when Trump says communist, he means Anthony Blinken, or he means Kamala Harris. And I think there's a kind of misread here, because I don't think there's a segment of the white population that a huge segment that is educable in any real form.
Carlo, that you just hit on the crux of the issue, and I know everybody here has a lot to say about that issue, but I'm thinking maybe we'll just go through and talk about each contribution, and then maybe get to that after, or maybe even have another show
or whatever. Okay.
But I mean, no, that's it. Yeah, I mean, you hit on a very important point, and it can derail our entire show. But I want to get Serafina in.
I'd like to hear from Serafina
and
too.
I want to get Jeremiah in too about his essay. But I have this beautiful artwork that Serafina did, and I wanted to maybe she could tell us a little bit about it and talk about the essay that was attached to this great mural. And I will remove this. Or if Serafina prefers, she can address what Carlos did. I don't want to dictate.
No, you're fine. I'm sorry. My facial expressions will be as they are. And but the painting is also, like Jahan said, a part of a part of a process of the collective, or how we all had to deal with certain topics. This one was an idea that I had brought up to Jeremiah about the Black Reconstruction written by Du Bois, and I wanted to do a painting based off of the first chapter called The Black Worker. And the essay, I didn't have that on hand, but that can be read on Avant-Guard Journal. But the point being of the painting is how much the Black worker represents, as Jahan had already spoken to, in the philosophical and revolutionary mode of consciousness of the people of America, how that also lends to the civil rights movement and its particular development of the Third American Revolution, and then how then it connects to kind of like the present questions of world peace, basically saying, where does the Black worker America fit in the struggle for world peace? So I'll just say that briefly, but other people could say more, I guess.
Oh, and special thank you to Serafina for joining us. She's joining us from school, which is why we have that background here.
Thank you for cutting class. You seem smart enough that it's not going to adversely affect you at all. It's a great mural. It's beautiful. It's really excellent work. Jahan or Jeremiah, do you want to make any comments about that?
Yeah, well,
Jahan?
I just wanted to reiterate that I think that this mural again is a testament to the depth of the arguments that Du Bois makes about the Black worker. I mean, like, as I was trying to establish with regard to, as opposed to Horn, I mean, the fact that this is philosophical, sociological, historical, but artistic as well. And I think this mural really beautifully captures the many ways that this concept speaks to us and is very central to the struggle for revolution in the United States.
Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add is I think part of what was really beautiful about unveiling the mural and the painting that Serafina did at the Henry Winston Symposium in Philly a few weeks ago is that, like, part of what we do what we try to do in the free school, and also what I hope we can do with the journal too, as part of especially, we have it online, and like we want it to be something which is broadly relevant to any kind of person in the United States or even internationally. But we also want it to be part of the life world of the city that we're in Philadelphia. And I just feel like it's something that's kind of hard to convey, just online, but it was really beautiful because we had people gathered around in the space where we were, which was the First Unitarian Church in Philly. And Serafina was able to kind of introduce and also show people, like, oh, this is who this person is, like she has all these revolutionaries, but also to talk about the narrative of the piece moving in like a certain direction. And this is part of, I think, what we are trying to do all the time in Philly. And actually, this kind of gets to something that the Free School is doing next year, which is the year of James Baldwin. But we want to bring people together to actually be invested in this search for ideas, for truth, for also new art, for a new way of looking at the world, and also new kinds of relationships with each other too. And this is kind of the part of it, which is, I think it's harder to capture just from being online. But it was something that was really beautiful about when we were having this. Serafina, you should say.
I need to go back and forth on people sometimes because I don't know what exactly, what we're trying to get at. But, and that's not a bad thing, but it's, it was in the, that reminds me that it comes back down to the journal, the purpose of the journal. And again, even the mission of the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation, because people are in, I should say, like, the role and responsibility that any individual, I say just as myself, in life in America is to strive for a purpose, is to strive for responsibility. And in this moment in history, it's always, and maybe in every moment, there's always that potential to strive to make the world a better place, to say it simply. And when in my mind, like, the journal has to deal with developing consciousness not only us as a group of individuals, a part of the Saturday Free School, but like what you're saying, Jeremiah, amongst our peers, amongst, the people that we, in Philly or anywhere. And because in changing society, like as we know, changing society, it's always geared by ideas. And I break it down to that point because art is used or can be a tool for education, and has a revolutionary responsibility. The same thing said of the sciences, of literature. And so what then happens is the exchange of ideas and the development of ideas come hand in hand with the moment that we're living in, dealing with the day-to-day historical developments, whether that had to do with the war on the Gazan people or deindustrialization. Like there's different ways to acclimate, one's mind to the struggle of ideas. But then it comes to a point of what can be produced because of your dedication to ideas and your dedication to the ideological struggle. And that, in my mind, has a very concrete form. Like it's very straightforward to me, because I think in a lot of ways in free school we've studied the civil rights movement, and we've seen people like Diane Nash and James Lawson as models of revolutionaries, and Martin Luther King. And so when we look at like different magazines from the past, we see total capability in not only making magazines similar or in the same vein, but being able to help engage in more mature levels of discussion that, whether that be in levels of philosophy, like what I'm saying is that ideas are not, away or above the people at all, or above people at all, above any individual. What I'm saying is that every person is also in a dialectical process within developing themselves as they are in the world. So as it comes with the painting, the exhibition that we did was alongside both photography that another person or participant in the Saturday Free School, Michelle Liu, had also put together. And so that also developed an environment, like Jeremiah was saying, to kind of explain the different faces. What I mean by what faces is the different aspects of, moral dedication and philosophical development that as individuals we had in free school, and then what we will do with said dedication and development moving forward amongst our peers in Philly and so on. But I think what I'm saying also is that a lot has been worked out, and like we have worked out a lot in the Saturday Free School throughout either the year, or like we had done events with Baldwin, or our year of Du Bois, our year of Gandhi, and like you're saying, with this 2024, as we're preparing for the year of Baldwin, in the midst of a crisis of our country, and what we're seeing in the world today, it provides an opportunity. Everything is more of an opportunity to develop amongst people our ideas and consciousness, as like what we're saying, the sword that heals, like weapons, that we can use for our future, I guess. I don't mean to sound haphazard, but I hope I'm understood.
I think I get the gist, definitely. You know, like you said, we're all in a process of development, and I think you guys are definitely, you know, helping to facilitate that, you know, in our society. And currently, you know, it's more necessary than ever, you know. But you know, I appreciate the contributions that each of you did to this first journal. And I just can't, you know, promote the journal enough. But I did want to get to Jeremiah because he attacked one of my heroes. I could not believe it that he went after.
Same with me. And
Goldstein.
you convinced Billy Bob. But before that, just for a last little thought on the painting, I noticed on the top right that you actually have, you know, the consciousness developing among society in the dialogue. We've known that for 100 years. But I think you have Ibrahim Traore, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping, right? You actually have current events in the top right.
And Martin Luther King in that top corner.
Of course, I'm sorry. Yeah, but he's not a contemporary. What I was saying is maybe you spoke of the current moment.
For Rore, yeah.
The current moment in time is very significant, and your article takes us even closer. And maybe that's what you guys want to shift to talking about, the current moment in the history of the empire.
Well, I wanted to get to Jeremiah's essay, and that does get us into, you know, Israel, Palestine, and Gaza, obviously. So, but yeah, no, he is definitely somebody that I have admired and looked up to. I've seen him speak a couple times here locally, you know, and I realized that, you know, he had limitations, but and my thinking was he was just so great on this one issue. And he was just such a solid moral voice on this one issue. But as I read your essay, you know, it occurs to me that the people that are truly great on our issue are the ones that properly contextualize that issue within everything else, you know, and so it's not about, you know, somebody who just is good on one issue really isn't that great on that issue if they can't contextualize it and help us to understand the way forward. But I'm probably butchering everything you thought you were saying. So let me hand it back to you.
But you convinced Billy Bob. Go ahead.
No, I agreed with your criticism.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you had a chance to read it, and even if you disagree like that, I'm also happy with that too. I feel like, I think this is something that the phrase that Doc used, which I agree with in writing this article, is that it was a vocation of agony, because yeah, like I also admired Finkelstein a lot, and I still think that he has made important contributions, especially on this question of Israel-Palestine. And he is a serious researcher. And I think it's very clear that he has, especially in terms of the Zionist establishment, the kind of abuses of the memory of the Holocaust to justify Israel's crimes. I think all of that stuff is really good. And actually the Free School had invited Finkelstein to speak a few years ago. I think it was in 2018 or 2019 for, was it the year of Du Bois or year of Gandhi? I forget.
Du Bois, I think.
Okay, yeah. So the Free School did the year of Du Bois, and Finkelstein had spoken at an event in Philly with the Free School that I was able to attend. And then I happened really randomly, we went to the launch of Sublation, which was kind of the one who had published his new book on cancel culture and identity politics. And really randomly, I happened to run into him on the subway going home. And he was like, he learned that I was an English major. And he was like, would you want to copy edit my book? And I was like, I'll think about it. And so I ended up not doing it just because it was too long. And I think it was beyond my skill set as just as a person. But anyways, basically, the reason why I felt it was important and why we felt it was important to kind of talk about Finkelstein in this way is because I think a few things stick out, which is, first of all, this is Finkelstein, the specific book, I'll burn that bridge to when I get to it, which was published, I think earlier this year, is Finkelstein wading into basically, culture wars, but essentially cancel culture, identity politics, all of that stuff, academic freedom as well. And this was kind of him making a foray into an area which I think he's not typically associated with, I guess, in the broader kind of public discourse. But something that really stuck out to me when I read the book is that he is basically, attacking identity politics, attacking cancel culture, which I think is really good. But that he draws upon people like Du Bois, like King, like Paul Robeson, all of whom are people that we like in the free school. We study these people and we look at them as basically as the inheritance of the American people as a whole, and as figures who can help guide like all American people towards a future. And so that really stood out to me, the fact that he was drawing explicitly on these figures who like I personally really look up to, I think are basically like the fathers of a new American people. And in spite of that, I felt like it's not just that he didn't do justice to like those kinds of figures, but that there's a particular dynamic in which it felt like he was almost like shrinking away from actually embracing the revolution, like essentially what is the revolutionary legacy of a figure like Du Bois, and instead kind of constricting someone like Du Bois to only be a theorist on race, as someone who can basically serve as a foil to essentially like the pseudo-intellectualism of an Ibram X. Kendi or Robin DiAngelo, all of whom deserve like basically not just criticism, but also condemnation because they are ruling class ideologues. But basically, Finkelstein is not able to actually, I think in an honest way, deal with the revolutionary ideas and the revolutionary legacy of these figures. And he basically kind of reduces them to be like, oh, like Du Bois only matters because he was a good scholar, essentially. And not
similar to Jahan's critique of Dr. Horn, very similar.
Yeah, so Jahan and I, it was really good for us to kind of have that dialogue as we were developing the articles together. But yeah, I also wanted to, I think, engage with Finkelstein not on the level of, oh, like, does he get his facts correct? Which is kind of the way that he engages also with, stuff like, even questions like Israel-Palestine. I feel like he's very much rooted in, like, the way he approaches stuff is like, oh, what are the facts? What is verifiable? And almost like this kind of empirical mindset. But to engage with them more on the level of ideas, of ideology, of real politics in American life right now. And I think in that sense, I also was very conscious of the fact that Finkelstein is recognized, especially by many young people, as kind of a public intellectual, as an authority, especially on not just on the question of Israel-Palestine, but on other topics. And I wanted to talk about that in the sense of, does Finkelstein realize or recognize that whether he likes it or not, that kind of position that he finds himself in, that comes with a kind of responsibility towards the younger generation. And I like the way that I read the book was that he is not actually able to kind of reconcile that sense of responsibility that is almost that people are looking to him for. And I don't know, maybe I'm interested to hear if like other people have thoughts on it, but a lot of that has to do with just the way that he talks about this current moment, the way that he also writes the book. It's like there are parts of it which are very, I feel like he's trying to be funny, but it just comes across as very either unserious or even just like weirdly offensive at certain points. And I wasn't sure why other people who had read the book hadn't talked about that, just like kind of the weird tone of it. And it's like, I have nothing against, I don't know, like humor in general or critique or parody, but there were just parts of the book that felt very odd to me. And I wasn't sure exactly why he was writing in that way, other than to say basically like, he's not actually able to deal with the full magnitude of the crisis in American society at this moment. And he can only kind of relate to it in a kind of like unserious way, which I think is also, when you get down to it, is I think also a vestige of whiteness, and not the whiteness that is kind of prescribed by like the Ibram X. Kendis of the world, but actually the way that Du Bois would talk about it or James Baldwin would talk about it. So yeah, I know that was a lot of stuff, but I wanted to engage with Finkelstein on a political level and not just on the level of, oh, does he get his facts right? Because I think that is kind of the easy way out.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. I can't help but articulate it, in the way that he's just really good on this isolated issue, and then his ability to contextualize it within and usher us towards, the most successful way to have a revolution and overcome these challenges. That's kind of non-existent. But you did a much better job of articulating it. And I ask everyone to go ahead and click the link at the bottom there and read the entire first volume for yourselves to get a better understanding exactly of what we've been talking about today. Did anybody else want to address the Finkelstein article, or we can all try and attack Carlo now?
Can I give just some thoughts?
That was a joke, Carlo. That's a joke.
Go ahead,
Ben. Sorry.
Uninformed thoughts, because yes, I followed Finkelstein a long time, a lot of his older books, and basically him talking about this book, but I haven't read the book and I haven't read your article, so I'm at a disadvantage. But what the impression I got from him before the current basically Israel-Palestine, Gaza, US conflict broke out, was he was emotionally, he was a fed up man, and he was fed up with what is called the contemporary sort of leftist ideologies, those different currents in America. And I felt that in everything he said, and maybe that comes across in the book. I don't know if he's respectful to the original theoreticians that you talk about, but I can imagine him being very flippant towards his contemporaries, towards what he, I think, rightly considers basically LARPing in the little what do you call it, the protest cage, and not really for like 30 or 40 years yielding any tangible results, because Chaz isn't a tangible result when you consider history. So that's just some thoughts to go along with it. But did you think anything of that?
No, I would definitely agree. I think I think something that I was like trying to work out was, I think it's very clear. I agree that it's not that even that he's fed up, but there's a lot of contempt that kind of really comes out in the book and the way that he writes, and also in all of the interviews that he's done. And the thing is that I think that many of the propagandists of the ruling class that he attacks are worthy of contempt, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just that if you are, it also gets to the point of like, what is the point of critique as well? Are you just critiquing because you want to make clear that like you're right and that these people are stupid? Or are you critiquing because in the way that, I don't know, even the way that Lenin critiques, like he also insults people very often.
He's brutal.
He's brutal. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But Lenin would critique in the sense of, you are trying to complete actually like new thoughts. You're actually using like these other kinds of ideologies, these ideological tendencies in order to move towards a resolution, to move towards like basically like an appropriate way of thinking about the crisis in society and all that stuff. And I just felt that he was only stuck in this place of reacting, like Finkelstein, that is. Finkelstein is stuck in the place of reacting to all of these figures and not actually able to process why did they arise. And actually the explanation that he gives in the book essentially is that all of this stuff, wokeness, identity politics, the only real reason why it came into existence was the Bernie movement. And I think that you can say that Bernie was a part of it, but I think it's a mistake to say that this was only a result of a ruling class reaction to the Bernie movement, because basically also then Finkelstein is kind of positing the Bernie Sanders movement and Bernie as kind of the almost like a savior in American politics, or as like the person who could have actually solved everything or been the real,
which we know he's not.
And which we know now, especially because Bernie is basically a lapdog of the Biden administration and a lapdog of war and all this stuff. But it's not just about Bernie, but I think Finkelstein essentially makes the argument that the Bernie movement was the logical successor to the civil rights movement. And I think that that is not just wrong, but it's a dangerous thing to say, especially to young people. And I think I don't know if any young people would actually feel that way, especially in the light of the past few years. But I think that that is a it's a serious, first of all, distortion of actually what the civil rights movement was and what it achieved, but also it's a disservice to the current generation and what they can achieve. And yeah, so I think it's like I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I just felt like it's one thing to be, you know, kind of contemptuous and to be fed up, but what are you actually saying to people in response to that? What are you saying to people, like people who are looking to you as an authority? And are you actually able to process kind of all of these ideological headwinds that are kind of coming at the American people all the time from the ruling class, which is trying to use wokeness to basically, you know, obviously divide the American people, but can you actually come up with a real response to it, or will you be stuck in essentially what I feel like is almost more of a immature kind of just state of reacting to everything all the time? And that's kind of the feeling that I got from the book, and also from the way I think that, you know, Finkelstein kind of carries himself in the interviews. And again, like these are not things that I say lightly, because again, like many of you, I respected a lot of what Finkelstein had contributed, and I still do respect a lot of his contributions, especially like on the Israel-Palestine stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I was also trying to process, you know, like how I felt as I was reading the book and I was writing the review with everyone. So yeah.
I don't know about young people, but this older person, you are successfully convincing. So well done. I'm reading your article right after this.
But, you know, what about the challenges we face? Like, I don't think it does any good to minimize the challenges we face. And I don't think anybody is minimizing the challenges we face. But I think, you know, and Lennon would talk about the immensity of the challenge of, you know, bringing the working class up to the, you know, the understanding and knowledge of the Vanguard Party. And that's the job of the Vanguard Party, is to, you know, this immense challenge of raising people's consciousness and understanding. And so, you know, that's obviously, you know, one of the reasons, like, I like to, you know, have a podcast to try and reach people. And obviously you guys are doing the same thing with the Saturday Free School and the Avant-Garde Journal. But it's a challenge, right? Because you look around, you know, there's the joke, the greatest argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. So can you guys speak to the immensity of the challenge, and, you know, what can we say to people that are, you know, are saying it's too hard and saying we shouldn't even try. It's too difficult. How can we persuade people to engage in this challenge and be part of a constructive effort to overcome, you know, this difficult problem? Serafina, I'm going to pick on you. You don't have to. I'm sorry.
Well, since you, well, one, it's the question of an immense challenge. Who is the challenge? What is the challenge? In my opinion, as we're seeing people, we know that people want peace, and I think that people do want discussion of ideas at whatever age, you know. So, I mean, for example, with the Palestinian conflict, it represents a certain level of consciousness of those who are involved. And the question of peace is not an abstract thing. And there are different, you know, there are different people who see this question of peace as important. And whether that be with the George Floyd moment, like I was listening to a Brianna Joy Gray's podcast earlier, and how she interviewed the two members in the Jewish Voices for Peace. And one of the guy mentioned how the ADL soldiers are, well, how the police force is trained in Israel, and then he connected it to how the police force treats Black people. And we see a correlation or a way that, even people have been seeing this problem of peace as central to the election, or how many people have been shifting from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. When the immense challenge question has to be clarified with how one sees the people, and how or any individual can be a part of wanting to change America. And I think that I just think that a way to be in society, a mindset that wants an individual to be in society is that's kind of first and foremost. And it's, again, ideas are not above any individual or any person, because I think everybody, to an extent in America, the question of who is educated and who's not educated, and how they are educated, and who, that I haven't read, reports on recently, so I can't say offhandedly like that. But I do know information is received in a variety of ways, whether that be through reading, through social media and TikTok, through conversation, and interaction. So quantifying how a person is educated may be a little bit, a useful, way to explain, but is not also everything. Because that's a whole matter in of itself, whether it be the highly educated or the lower educated. It ends up more or less being about this question of the moral commitment. And this kind of, as an example to explain that, if anybody does not want to see a child die, and how that reached a, number, how it reaches anybody, really. It could be said the same as no child deserves to die in gun violence. No child deserves to die in starvation or whatever. And so, again, it comes for me down to this, moral thing, which is ultimately tied to, as we are explaining, even when I read Lenin insult people, he's being that passion comes out of his moral and political commitment. And how dare a person talk down to the people? How dare the person, that kind of thing. So I understand that on a personal, not in terms of me, but how a person would talk, So that's where I'll start with that. But
it sounds like shared interests. I mean, the working class has a shared interest, and that is a key to overcoming, the oppositional interests of the ruling establishment. And then, like you said, the way people are educated, and indoctrinated, really, that's definitely a challenge. But it can also be, a strength and a strategy that we can employ to, re-educate people and help them to see how they're being lied to and misled, etc. But thank you so much, and I'm sorry for putting you on the spot. What about Jahan? Do you have any? What would you say to somebody who says, the challenge is too hard? There's no point in even trying.
Carlo,
well,
yes.
yeah, there's a few things I would say. I mean, I think first of all, some of what we are trying to present with our work is, first of all, the examples that we have to have before us. I mean, when we look at Du Bois starting the Niagara movement and really starting his political career at the nadir of U.S. race relations. You know, the aftermath of the defeat of Reconstruction and lynchings and Jim Crow, and of course the Gilded Age and the immense kinds of inequality and the rise of U.S. imperialism and so on in that period of the turn of the century. But a person who had immense optimism, who had immense belief in the people, that the people can actually remake the society. And similarly, when we look at a king, I mean, the real king, not the one that the elites present to us, a person, again, who came in at the height of McCarthyism, really, and showed tremendous courage in confronting the ruling elite. And I think, you know, you mentioned the concept of the vanguard. And I think that, you know, obviously we have, and it's very important, Lenin's contributions to the concept of the vanguard party. But I think also what we are trying to get at here, and when we look at a person like Henry Winston, who tried to synthesize Lenin, Du Bois, and King, it's that we actually, 100 plus years after Lenin, we have to construct a renewed concept of what a vanguard will be, which is, I think, what we are trying to get at with our project. And that has to take into account the immense contributions of these figures, of the Du Boises and the Kings and the civil rights movement, which, you know, we are calling the Third American Revolution. And, you know, all of our lives have really been touched by that. I mean, the ways in which we all exist in the U.S., of course, those revolutions are incomplete, but the opportunities we've had, the ways that the American people have had the opportunity to know each other across the color line and across other divisions. And, you know, what Doc also said in his article about Henry Winston, this moral imperative, which is very important to the Du Boises and the Kings and the Winstons, and remains very important. And I think, you know, to your point about the 5-minute conversation, I'm very optimistic, because I think that we are actually living in a time where the 5-minute conversations are getting better and better. Of course, nobody is perfect. There's still a lot of contradictions among the people, whether you take the Ukraine war, whether you take the situation in Gaza, whether you take NATO, whether you just take overall anti-Biden, anti-state apparatus feeling, anti-elite feeling. All of that is at a all-time high. I mean, there was a latest poll we discussed, was about 70% of Americans said they would not fight in a war for this government. There was an earlier poll saying 20% of people said they would be willing to take up arms to overthrow the government. I mean, these are tremendous opposition. And, you know, just my firsthand experience, even in these protests for Palestine. I mean, the fact that all these, you know, there are some people that have a personal connection to Palestine, but all these people from many communities all together in record numbers, really for a great moral issue. And, you know, of course, they also see how it ties to the, you know, the ways in which their communities are being impoverished, but it is also a very important moral issue. So I think when you put all that together, there's tremendous reasons for optimism. And I think the major problem is a lot of people feel isolated, you know, across the country and so on, especially those who are leftists. But I think that what we are trying to do with the journal is show that ideas, art, all of that can serve as a weapon of tool of optimism and uplifting people and presenting a vision, you know. And I think some of the people we've tried to critique as well, their issue is not being able to present that vision to the people.
Yeah, I would just add, is it okay if I also answer the question?
Please. Thank you, Jahan. That was great. Thank you. Jeremiah.
Yeah, I think the thing is that, yeah, like part of what we say in the mission statement of the journal is that we're optimists about the future and essentially about the people. And why I feel like that's important is because it's not that and I think this also came out in the conversation you guys had with Doc a few weeks ago, but we're not like idealistic people. Like we're not like, you know, we're not looking for optimism just because we want to be optimistic. But I think actually a lot of it is based off of, can you actually look at the objective situation, the political situation in the United States right now, and relate to it in a way which is actually not based off of preconceived notion about who people are, about who ordinary people are, but actually try to deal with the situation as it is. And the thing that is so interesting, and partially the reason why I guess we're doing this journal and trying to make all these efforts, is because I feel like for a lot of people on the left or people who see themselves as radicals, it's almost like we tend to operate with these preconceived notions about how people like what people think, how they'll relate to world events, how they'll relate to the, all this stuff. And I feel like it kind of preconditions the way that you would think about the ordinary American person. But if you actually look at these broader, the kind of changes that Jahan was talking about, like there has actually never been a moment like this in American history, like never, where you have not just in terms of political parties, but I don't know, just this vast rejection of the ruling class, and also the recognition, of the fact that America has a ruling class. Like I guess this will get into the Trump thing, but for instance, like my dad is like a Trump supporter. He's like kind of, he's a reasonable person who is interested in the Trump movement. And it's so interesting where there are all these new possibilities, and like as Jahan was saying, it's not without contradiction. But if you see yourself as a revolutionary, why should you be scared of contradiction? And why should you be scared to kind of go towards that and to want to actually work things out? And even and this is probably more anecdotal, I guess, but I've never been able to talk to my parents who are immigrants to this country about the fact that, like, oh, like to use the words like, yeah, even concepts like ruling elite, like deep state. I don't know. I just feel like there's so much possibility in American politics right now. And I feel like because people, especially people on the left, are so scared to actually deal with that real situation and the real state of people and what people are actually thinking, that instead you kind of conjure up all of these excuses to not actually be interested in people. Things like, like accusing Trump of being a fascist, which is not even so much about Trump, but about the Trump movement. And I know this was a point of contention in previous conversations, but I just feel like we feel not without reason, but because we're trying to actually look at the situation in America right now, where America is in its history, from a standpoint of actually trying to be scientific about it, almost of trying to be truthful about it. And I think this is something that I feel like you get a lot in reading something like Black Reconstruction by Du Bois, where he's not using that book to kind of trash the white worker. I feel like that's a misconception that people get a lot from Du Bois. He's not using it to trash the white worker, but to say in a moment of crisis in American history, all ideological political class relationships are fluid. And what happened to the white worker was basically initially white workers aligned themselves with Black workers under this kind of the Freedmen's Bureau, what Du Bois calls the dictatorship of the Black proletariat, and during the Reconstruction era. But then basically white workers were clawed back to the side of the planter class, of the emerging new bourgeoisie class, of the industrial capitalists, all that thing, to kind of ally themselves with racism. But the point of that is not to say that white people are forever doomed to be racist, but Du Bois is saying, no, it's a fluid situation. And the fact that all of this happened during Reconstruction is a sign that there's always possibility of change. And part of the reason why I feel like it is not just politically a mistake, but is also even just, I don't know, like kind of analytically a mistake to kind of view like all white workers or white people as like hopelessly backwards and racist, because I think that essentially when you make that argument, you're also making an argument about the Black worker, because you're saying that essentially the conscience of the American people was not actually touched or changed in any respect by the civil rights movement. And what we're saying is that actually the American people were changed far more by the civil rights movement than the ruling class or the academics who are propagandists for the ruling class are willing to admit. And that whether it is consciously said or not, even something like the Trump movement is a manifestation of the fact that something like the civil rights movement had this deep impact on the consciousness of the American people. The fact that it is so natural for Americans to reject these wars, like I feel like all of those are like positive signs, and we feel that it is actually a sign of the impact that something like the Black Freedom Movement had on the general American public, and that this is something which is rooted in the historical memory of the American people and is manifesting, although not in ways that are like always crystal clear from the very beginning. And so we're trying to deal with a fluid situation, but also to always see the possibilities latent within the contradictions, within the movement, which is essentially how, you know, someone like Du Bois would look at American society, American history. And yeah, I just feel like there's a kind of almost like people get into this mental trap of wanting to be pessimistic, because to be pessimistic is ultimately a convenient and an easy way to relate to the world. And I feel like it actually takes a lot more courage to be truthful, but also to see the possibility latent in everything. And yeah, sorry, I know that I talked a lot, but I feel like this is something that we think about a lot in the free school and that we're trying to engage with. Just a sense of like it's so easy to be pessimistic and cynical about stuff, but we're living in such a moment where there's like all of these possibilities which were not there before in American history. And can we actually be worthy of dealing with those possibilities, or basically will we consign ourselves to like essentially, yeah, the dustbin of history? And I feel like I can't live with myself if I kind of adopt that kind of cynical approach.
Yeah, let's say there's a difference in our personal quantification of how difficult the challenge is. Let's say there's like a 99.99% chance that the challenge is too hard and we're going to fail. Or let's say somebody disagrees, says, no, it's like a 50%. However anybody quantifies this, to me, regardless if it's 0.0001% chance or 50% chance, like, why not try? Like, what else are we going to do? So for me, it's like, I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm going to say the truth, and I'm going to try and do my best, what I can to, progress and to, develop the, revolutionary spirit, the unity of the working class, whatever it is, to overcome, the challenges that we face, whether it's a 0.0001% chance or it's a 50% chance. And there's an argument there, about like what we're facing. And I know there's differences, but to me, it's like, you gotta try. What else are we gonna do? That's what we're here to do.
Well, I've been trying all my life.
Yeah,
I disagree. Being cynical is wearisome and tiring and debilitating, and the fossil you're looking at is proof of that. I want to go back to Jahan when he pointed out the polls. Where the first poll was such and such a percentage of Americans are against going to war. Well, there's reasons for that. Convenience. A lot of people don't like to go to war because they don't want to be inconvenienced. That's an American trait. The wars currently being waged are being waged by Democrats. So there's a lot of people that don't like Democrats who say, I mean, there's a whole scope of reasons people answer polls like that. The second poll thing was 21% of Americans are ready to take up arms against the U.S. Blowhards, discount the blowhards, and not one person in that poll who genuinely was going to take up arms was going to tell somebody they were going to take up arms in a public poll. And we had Regis Tremblay on from Crimea. And he was talking about his brother-in-law or something. Anyway, he's in America, and he's talking Civil War. I said, Regis, what sides are going to engage in this Civil War? You don't expect the LGBT community to take up arms, do you? I don't think that's going to happen, against right-wing militias. That's not going to happen. If the right-wing militias legitimately take up arms, it's going to be a Waco exponentially. They're going to get wiped out in a matter of hours, if not minutes, and that'll be the end of that. That's the notion of a civil war is absurd. So that notion of change is just, I mean, I can't even conceive of what two sides would be to really engage in something as like a civil war. I mean, it's just not even palatable. So my problem is, who is the working class? I made my living with a bookstore on Connecticut Avenue in Washington, D.C. My clientele was wealthy and highly educated. But if I put up something like I put up Smedley Butler's famous speech that was published in the Nation about war is a racket, I put it in my window. I got flack from people. I put up satires on Michael Milcom and Gunga Dinesh. I got Mrs. What's her name? I can't remember her last name now. Um, Complaining about it. I put up poetry by Ed Dorn. Very, I'd call abhorrences. You want to talk about somebody that was cynical about America? I put up the poems on the end of bookcases. Got complaints. These people, it's like Chomsky says, they're educated white people largely, by and large, and the complaining, and they're wealthy, and they're making essentially, if you look at them crudely, the same complaints that say my uncles and cousins, when my uncles were alive, would make. That and those things are essentially racist. They didn't want to hear, and these people, all of them that came into my store, I would guarantee, vast majority, if you said you're a racist, they would disagree. They would firmly disagree. So I'm getting I don't really know where to begin with this argument, because we can't even define what the working class is. We don't even know what it is. I mean, all the different avenues of employment in this country. And is it based on your job? Is it based on your education? Is it based on your upbringing? What constitutes a working class?
Relation to the means of production, and your clientele you were talking about, the well-educated, well-off Washington D.C.ers, the belly of the beast. That's the bureaucracy of the empire. I mean, that's a very particular group you're talking.
Yeah, sure. I know. Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't project that to all. I wouldn't project that to Alabama, or all of America.
Well, Alabama.
I wouldn't.
I don't know.
I was gonna remind you of that story where you told about Krauthammer getting in your store and being.
That's it. But Mrs. Krauthammer, right?
It was Mrs. Krauthammer. But we don't need to do that. So, okay, guys, you failed. You did not convince Carlo. That was the whole point of this discussion. So I'm sorry that didn't work out. You guys have been very generous with your time. I mean, we're an hour and a half in. We didn't even really get to current events. I don't know what the consensus is. If anybody needs to drop out, if anybody would like to continue, I mean, I'm happy to, continue the discussion. Where's everyone at?
I don't think we need to get to current events, but some notes I've been taking mentally. I love that Jahan referred to, Lenin, the birth of the Soviet Union. That was like in time removed 100 years from us, right? Mao, 80 years from us. And whatever American, let's not use socialism, the word, but camel shade, window shades or camels, like Michael Parenti said, whatever it will look like, it won't look like the Soviet Union. It won't look like even contemporary China, because you have to take into the consideration of where the American people are, their history, all that. So I'm hoping that at least I'm looking at maybe the educator of future revolutionaries. I know I'm the old guy here and you're the young guys, but for me, it was very interesting. And yeah, stuff to think about. What I would have liked to hear, because I have to thank Jeremiah for saying it's a struggle of ideas. So you didn't use the now, I think, trendy marketplace of ideas. So you're more advanced already than that stupid meme or phrase. But what I didn't hear was it's unfair to say a program because you're not a Vanguard party, but something that, well, some of those ideas that would unify. I don't know if we have time for that. We could do that, or just finishing thoughts and do that another time. But something breakthrough, that actually unifies the Alabama farmer, the MAGA hatted, Trumper, and the guy who got fired from the Michigan, whatever, who was a factory worker back when there was Detroit was Motown, and all of these people, and the black belt and all of that.
Right.
I mean, is there something like that? Of course, I have to read the entire journal. Now I will.
Well, if I could say, in response to that, and then maybe a bit in response to what Carla was saying earlier as well, I think, well, first of all, I think that, we have to see history in, longer periods of time. When we are speaking of the revolution going forward in the U.S., we have to look back. We are calling it the struggle for a fourth American Revolution. And so we have to understand that we are very much in line with the previous three American revolutions, 1776, Civil War and Reconstruction, which, we've discussed a lot today with Du Bois, and something very, very important. And then the Civil Rights Movement, which is equally important, and perhaps the most important of those three for our time. And so this struggle obviously is more than one lifetime. And I think that we are in a fortunate period that we may see some very, very significant things in the next few years. And I think that, even as far as these polls, of course, it's the ideological lens through which you interpret it. And, it's not just polls alone, but the ways in which you see the people behaving, the sociology, the attitudes, voting patterns, all that put together. And we may disagree on that. But I do think, and I mean, we think as Free School, that when you put these polls in with the rejection of Biden, with the ways in which people are rejecting the mainstream media, which the ways in which people are turning out for issues like Gaza, all of that put together shows you that what is happening is essentially a political realignment. There was an article in the New York Times, I think about 1 or 2 months ago, by this gentleman. It was about this gentleman, Richard Hawes, who I think is president of Council for Foreign Relations, which is a major elite think tank. Yes, but he said that, I've dedicated my whole life to defending democracy, and democracy is quote unquote when it comes to him. He's talking about, by democracy means U.S. imperialism and their concept of democracy. And I saw all these threats and so on, and people today are talking about Russia and China as the main threats to U.S. democracy. But what really keeps me up at night is a threat at home, by which it means the threat of the American people turning against the elites. And when I cite polls like about the 20-some% of people are telling pollsters that they're willing to take up arms, I'm not saying it to suggest that I want there to be a civil war. Of course I don't, between the people. And I don't think that many of those people are actually saying that tomorrow they're going to pick up the gun, but they're expressing their extreme anger at the elites and at the system, which creates essentially one could argue a pre-revolutionary situation. The ground is very fertile for that sort of thing, for channeling that anger. And I think that as far as a program, I mean, this is something that has to be part of a bigger educational, ideological project, which we are engaged in. But I think that, if we can translate this kind of populist revolt into two specific issues, I think it comes down to jobs and peace. That's what people are very much crying out for. I mean, that was the success of Trump, and continuing to be the success up until this point, that he's able to speak to those two demands among the people across all of these divisions. And, the Rage Against the War Machine march that happened last year, and I've just read recently it's happening again, was very much also centered around those 2 points. And I think a new politics has to emerge out of these two demands among the people, which I agree totally, will look very different from the Russian Revolution, French Revolution, Chinese Revolution. And perhaps the closest thing may be the last revolution in the United States, civil rights movement. But of course, it will. Things have changed dramatically since the 60s as well. But and I think all of this will come out through this great ideological struggle that we have to engage in.
Jobs and peace is enough for me. I mean, Lenin used peace, land, and bread. Look what he done. So thank you for that, Jahan.
Yeah, I would only add to what Jahan was saying. I think, because I feel like when you talk about a program, like I feel like one way of interpreting that is of like slogans, like demands of the people. But a lot of what I feel like I think about, or what we in the Free School think about, is in some ways like what we are trying to do is, if you first of all, if you take as like a political fact and political reality that essentially the vast majority of the American public has rejected the ruling class in various ways. It manifests in various ways, and whatever direction they're going, like there's many different directions, all that. But essentially, if you take as a fact that, again, yeah, the American people have rejected the ruling class, which also means that they are rejecting the ideology and the philosophy of the ruling class and of the dominant ideology of the United States, even if they don't yet have a complete ideological alternative to it. Part of what that creates the necessity for is, again, like this is why like the struggle of ideas is not a thing in itself, but is part of the democratic demand of this time, which is that can ordinary people across many different backgrounds, across many different geographies, cities, all of that stuff, can the American people come together and actually engage in this search for new ideas and essentially for a future for the country? And in a lot of ways, how I think about it is, I think what the civil rights movement was doing was not just basically, attacking segregation, all that stuff, but was essentially creating a space within American society, which was for almost like a new kind of democratic consciousness to emerge amongst American people. And this is something that James Baldwin talks about, for instance, but I feel like people have this misconception that, attacking segregation was just about, correcting the racist attitudes of white people or kind of alleviating the oppression of Black people. Like all of that is true, but part of it is that what white supremacy had done to the American people was to kind of inculcate an almost helplessness, almost a psychology and ideology of like a subservience to the ruling class. And what the civil rights movement was able to do was to create this like very different kind of almost politics, a democratic space in which ordinary people could say, no, like we are the ones who will determine how we will relate to one another. And I think this is part of what I see, like what we're doing in the free school. We are trying to create a space in Philadelphia in which ordinary people can actually come together and say, okay, like if we accept as a given that basically we don't trust for instance, like the Democratic elite who basically run the city of Philadelphia and don't care about our people and are basically fine with people killing each other in the streets and also with these ghastly constructions of these drug encampments like in Kensington, in which you have basically hundreds of people who are basically walking around as zombies. And this is basically part of the normality of life in Philadelphia. And the Democratic establishment will do nothing about it. Then can you actually have a space in which people come together and try to find a way forward? Because part of the reason why, sorry, I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but basically part of the reason why we feel that it is necessary to, rethink, as Jahan said, this concept of a vanguard is that actually counter to what I feel like many people on the left feel, which is to say that people are unconscious or that they're less conscious than before. Actually, what we are kind of positing and hypothesizing is that the American people are more conscious than they've ever been. And that this creates an opportunity, but this also creates a necessity for, as Jahan said, new kinds of politics and new ways of engaging in the political struggle, which accepts as a reality that people are more conscious than they've ever been, and that what is necessary is to create these spaces within basically public life where ordinary people can come together and actually search for a way forward, and do so under the banner of the previous revolutions in American history, especially the civil rights movement. I don't know if that fully made sense, but it's kind of like a meta level of how like we understand like what we're doing in the city of Philadelphia, but also like how we understand like what are the demands of this time, and what is a way of politically operating in the actual crisis of American society right now, but also the actual capacities of the American people in this moment.
Well, the part about like Kensington, for example, in California, there are more than several. There are many movements where people now live. People that were living on the street are getting drug rehabilitation. They're put into tiny houses. They live rent free, and they're allowed to work. And actually, in a number of them, they actually own the houses. That said, one of the things that you have to remember is that, say, for MAGA, for instance, MAGA is not a grassroots movement by any stretch of the imagination. The Koch brothers were deeply involved in the creation of it with ALEC and placing people in all kinds of positions in local governments all around the country. Literally thousands of people who work in city councils and work in mayoral positions and so on and so forth got their money from the Koch brothers or several other people that are close to Steve Bannon who are billionaires. So it's another billionaire movement that's created this MAGA thing around Trump because they saw him early on. Certainly Bannon did. I mean, he's got a history of that. That goes back decades. That this guy had potential as a kind of demagogue, and it's being financed by billionaires, so at the local level, I have nothing but admiration for people who create things such as Earthships, for example, we were talking about, or that create little communities where people who are living on the street can get off the street, and even though the situation seems prison-like in certain ways, they have curfews and it's fenced in and all that. They're still happier, and they seem happier and healthier. That seems doable. But I think when it comes to the broader thing, what we're being faced with is imminent fascism. Imminent, I mean, on a scale that'll make what had gone before trivial by comparison domestically, and it's minority people that are going to be most affected by what goes on. Minority people and Stalinists like Billy Bob, but that's what I see coming. And
yeah, I mean, I don't think the future is written in stone, and we need to do what we can to make the future a better future. And so I don't think that.
But who has more? They got more stones. Don't you know?
Well, if I could say,
at the local level, try that. If you have an amenable city council that'll help you get people out of Kensington and into tiny houses or whatever, into rehab, go for it. But when it comes to the big picture, they got all the stones. You don't have
so did the King of France before the revolution. So did the Tsar of Russia.
Also, the good news is I just saw New York Times broke 2 hours ago that the Koch network is endorsing Nikki Haley. So, well, but the Department of Justice is prosecuting Trump. The Koch brothers and other 4 right-wing billionaires are endorsing the anti-Trump force. So I think clearly we have a great disagreement on Trump and fascism, but which we maybe we'll continue to talk about.
Well, yeah,
It's a regular feature on this show, but maybe trying to wind down, Carlo.
Yeah, I know, but Ben, you pointed out the fall of a monarchy. We're not talking about a monarchy here.
No, we're talking about the fall of an oligarchy.
Is Trump hegemonic or anti-hegemonic? And I think we would argue that he's anti-hegemonic, and you disagree. It's a divisive issue.
Why do you think they constructed it? They constructed it this way because they wanted it to be indestructible, and it. Yeah. Never mind. I'm tired.
Okay.
Guys, awesome show. I really appreciated everybody's contribution. Serafina, I don't want to cut you off. If you had a comment. Okay. I really appreciate everybody being able to join us for an hour and 45 minutes and everybody's contribution. We handled our disagreements in a mature way. And that's always important. And nobody is left feeling like they were not given a chance or that, that they're unhappy with how they were treated, which is also important. And it's not always easy. But you guys are great. I'm very, you fill me with optimism. So I hope to have you guys back. There's all kinds of issues that we can dig into. But this was a great overview of the most relevant things, I think. Does anybody? I don't want to cut people off. Ben, did you want to?
I just want to say how I wish you nothing but happy trails, good tidings with the Avant-Garde Journal. So everything I've heard, really cool. I want to dig into it even more.
Yeah. So when can we expect volume 2? Any ideas?
We are an entirely volunteer collective, so we're in the midst of planning future issues and all that stuff. But yeah, thank you to all three of you for engaging with us and actually having this kind of conversation with us. And yeah, more than anything, like, we want the journal to be something that sparks dialogue and sparks conversation amongst people, and hopefully creates the condition for people to look at things in a new way, and to try to find a way together. But yeah, I'm really excited to hear if you guys read other articles in the first issue, but also there's a lot of other previously published work that's kind of affiliated with the Free School that is also on the Avant-Guard Journal website. And so you can also read all that as well and kind of also get a sense of, like, there's been a very interesting, like, ideological trajectory that many of us have gone through to kind of get to this point. But yeah, TBD in terms of future issues, but we're hoping to kind of also consolidate or kind of synthesize Avant-Garde with what the Free School is doing in terms of the Year of Baldwin and stuff like that this upcoming year in Philly, as well as other locations, I think in maybe Chicago, maybe New Mexico as well. But yeah.
Thank you again for coming. Billy Bob, do you want to take us off into the sunset, or Carlo?
Oh, no, not Herbie Nichols, guys. Philly, Herbie Nichols. Don't neglect Herbie Nichols' music. Thank you.
So we're here at your disposal. Anytime you guys want to join us, talk about whatever, please let me know. But no, I'm excited. Everybody, if they want to donate, you mentioned it's volunteer. If anybody wants to donate, I'm sure that's all at the website as well. So but with that, we will be back on Tuesday for our Friday. We'll be back on Friday with our 36th episode. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.